Hi, so this is a more detailed explanation of how to get the results for the first and second derivative for example number 5 on the slides for section 3.3. All right, so the function that they give us to look at is 8 over x squared minus 4, okay? And there's a lot more involved within the problem itself, but they don't really go into the steps of how the answers to the f prime and f double prime are arrived at. They just state them and tell you that if you were to do the work and clean it up, that's what you should get. All right, so when we get to that step where we have to find the first derivative, we have to use the quotient rule. So that formula is the denominator times the derivative of the numerator. So I just wrote it with the derivative of the numerator first. So the numerator is 8, its derivative is 0. Multiply that by the denominator, x squared minus 4, minus, and then we take the derivative of the denominator, which is 2x, times the numerator, which is 8. And then all of that's going to get divided by the denominator squared. So that's just your quotient rule. So 0 times the x squared minus 4 will just be 0. And then we have minus 2x times 8 would be 16x. We get 0 minus 16x on the top, which is just negative 16x. And then the bottom we're just going to leave like this, x squared minus 4 squared. So that's how they get the f prime. All right, then to get the second derivative, you have to use your quotient rule again. All right, so we again take the derivative of the numerator, which will be negative 16, times the denominator, minus, and then when we take the derivative of the denominator, I'm going to use the chain rule. Okay, so the chain rule says to bring down the 2 in the front, and then we get x squared minus 4 to the 1 less power, so the first power, and then you multiply that by the derivative of the inside, which is 2x. So all of this right here is taking the derivative of the bottom using the chain rule, and then that gets multiplied by the numerator, negative 16x. And then, because we're in the quotient rule still, all of this gets divided by the denominator squared. So when you square something that's already squared, it becomes a power of 4. All right, so now we're going to have to clean this up. So this first term we're just going to leave like it is for now, negative 16 times x squared minus 4 squared. But all over here, I'm going to multiply the negative 2 times the positive 2x times the negative 16x. So the negative times the positive times the negative is why we have a plus sign, because there's two negatives there. 2 times 2 is 4, and then that times 16 is 64, and then I have an x times an x. So that's where the 64x squared comes from. And then the x squared minus 4 part is still here. Denominator stays as it was. All right, in this next step, I'm going to leave it like it is and just factor out the greatest common factor. The only other way to handle this denominator is to FOIL this binomial, then distribute the negative 16, distribute the 64x squared here, and then clean it all up and then refactor it. All right, but instead, if you look at this whole thing right here is the first term. And then you're adding this whole thing here is your second term. So I'm going to look at those two terms that are being added and factor out the greatest common factor. So you have a 16 and a 64, so that we can factor out a 16. And then the other thing that they have in common is you have an x squared minus 4 to the second, and over here you have an x squared minus 4 to the first. So one copy of x squared minus 4 can also get factored out. So this 16 x squared minus 4 is the greatest common factor of those two terms on the top. All right, so if those are taken out, we have to write down in the brackets here what's left over. Well, the 16 factored out, so I still have a negative sign sitting here. And then remember I had this x squared minus 4 squared, but one copy got pulled outside, so I still have one copy of that left here. So in the first term I have a negative 1 times one copy of x squared minus 4. All right, over here, remember the 16 got factored out, so if you had 64, that would leave a 4. This x squared is still here. We didn't factor any x's out. But this whole thing, I only had one copy to begin with, and it all got factored out. So that's all outside. So the only thing left inside of here for the second term is the 4x squared. All right. So the 16 stays. Notice I factored out this x squared minus 4. And on the bottom, I had x squared minus 4 to the fourth. So if you cancel this one and take one of these away, that's why this one disappears, and this one becomes a third power. And then inside the parentheses, you distribute your negative sign. So negative x squared plus 4, and then you got this plus 4x squared behind all that. and then we're just going to clean up the like terms inside of here. So x squared, or 4x squared minus x squared is 3x squared plus the 4. And then they kept the 16 on the outside, and then this was what they ended up with for the denominator. So especially that second derivative there's a lot of steps that they don't show in the PowerPoint slide. So hopefully this is helpful if you're trying to read through that and understand how they got those answers.